This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
You lost all constitutional rights the moment you walked through that door. When the judge sat down there, I sentenced you to 10 years at the Idaho State Penitentiary. You walked in that door, you was a number. And the inmates understood that.
If you're out there and live past the period of being here, just lay down and do it.
Those inmates that were here in the institution during an execution, it had an impression on them that maybe was still with them to some extent. Maybe they don't think about it anymore, but it had an impression on them, I'm sure.
They wouldn't let me out until I get back to stuff. 7 months later, I give it back to them.
That was one of the problems we ran into. You had 5 or 6 guys that were sitting in a place, smoking and joking and drinking coffee. Pretty quick, they'd hatched a plan in there to get under your skin some way or try to figure a way out.
Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Behind Gray Walls podcast, a podcast about the old Idaho State Penitentiary, the men and women who lived and worked here. My name's Anthony, and I'm chatting here in the studio in the trenches with Sam.
Hi, everybody.
And with our beloved Skye in Washington, D.C.
Beloved is so nice. Yes, I'm here in our nation's capital.
How's it been going?
It's good, yeah. I don't think majority of our listeners know that I have actually been here in Washington, D.C. for, I think, almost exactly a year. I think I moved here exactly a year ago today. I could be wrong about that. But for various reasons, we couldn't talk about the new phase in my life, but the problems, those all got resolved. And so now, yes, I can be open about my life out here, which is crazy. So yes, I live here permanently, at least for the next several years, as long as things continue to go well. But I work here as a walking tour guide. I do most of the big tourist areas, so I can do tours of our National Archives, which is where our Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights is. I do Capitol. I do the Library of Congress. I do Ford's Theater and the Lincoln assassination. I'm having the absolute time of my life and taking what I learned and what I started doing at the old pen, and now I do it in my real job, which is so cool.
So cool.
That makes sense. You'd find a job as a storyteller, Skye. That's right up your alley.
It's been the best. It's been the best. And I always talk about the podcast because a lot of people, ask like, oh, why are you interested in this? Like, why didn't you want to teach with your PhD? And I always resist saying, have you met college students? But, that I say, I started out at the old Idaho State Penitentiary and I started a podcast and I fell in love with the storytelling and that's what I want to do. And even with all of the insanity that is happening in the nation's capital right now, I feel so lucky. I'm so excited. So if any of our listeners ever make it out to Washington, D.C., I work for Unscripted Tours. Feel free to look us up. You can, even get in touch with me. I guess you'd have to do it through our Behind Gray Walls because I don't have my personal stuff on there, but would love to see any of you out here. And actually, one of my managers is unironically listening to the podcast, and she says now she'll have to make a trip out to Boise. And she hasn't gotten to the Sam seasons yet, but she says, Anthony, she has to get an autograph from Anthony. So
he's a celebrity, Skye.
I know. She even told me, I was like, that's so funny. And she was like, sometimes even when you come into the office, I'll have just been listening to you on my ride in, and I'm like, oh yeah, you are not just in the podcast. So yeah. It's funny. But I'm spreading the good word of the pod all over, so.
Oh, I love it. That's so cool. And, with the semi-quincentennial next year, you're going to be extra busy. I bet we get a handful of listeners who come out to D.C. for it.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Totally.
Please come see me. Come take tours with me. I hopefully am just as passionate on my tours as I am on the pod. But what the heck have you guys been up to?
Ooh, we've just been sitting around.
I know. You guys don't ever do anything. We talk about this all the time.
Just so bored.
Yeah. Just so you listeners know, Sam and myself and all of our Old Pen staff and a majority of our agency have been working to reimagine the visitor experience at the Old Pen. So, you know what? We in the future will get back to doing 20 episodes a year of this podcast, but right now we are heads down. Besides that, we're just trying to run the site day to day and host events. We happen to be recording this a day before our 32 Cells art show, and if you haven't come to that, and this year's theme was Wanted. Sam and our education team, Mariah, they dug through all of our Wanted posters. You want to talk a little bit about that, Sam?
Yeah, obviously the fans of the pod are going to hear a lot of this season. I will have a lot of escapes, but we gathered 40 historical documents of Wanted posters ranging from 1896 to 1973, and it's incredible just to see the documents, see these posters evolve over the years, and it is very compelling to learn about the prices put on people's heads.
Yeah.
Some people would escape and get a $25 bounty. Some people, as we might see later on this podcast season, would get a $200 bounty. So what would make the difference? Why would some people have such a large collection? And we might even see an episode about a bounty hunter at some point in this season. So good things to come.
Yeah. Man, but I am so excited to get back on the podcast, start telling these stories, share all this with everybody, and keep digging up more and more history here at the site.
Yeah, you guys are doing amazing things. It's so cool to see how far the project, and by project I just mean the penitentiary as a whole, has come since even I started. Gosh, when was that? 2013, I think, which is bananas.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy for you guys, and can't wait to make my way out there soon. I'm so happy for you guys. Well, look at us doing great things in history in our areas.
From coast to coast,
Coast to coast, 2,000 miles apart.
I love it.
All right, so who's starting today? Are you starting today?
Sure, I could get good.
All right, do it.
All right. So today I am covering John Jurko, number 3416. My sources, of course, is Prisoner File at the Idaho State Archives, the Historic Idaho Statesman newspapers hosted by the Boise Public Library, Library of Congress chronicling America, newspapers.com, ancestry.com, the book Hanged by Kathy Dinehard Hill, and the Czechoslovak Genealogical Society international website article about Czech-Slovak immigration. So, John Jurko, a mystery, and I've been wanting to tell this story for a long time and spent countless hours digging, and I still have questions, and I feel like someday I'm going to want to redo this episode because I'm going to finally have stumbled across something that tells me more. But according to his 1918 draft card, John Jurko was born on May 18th, 1881 in Ohio. Did not specify exactly where. His prison file implied that he was born in 1874, and the 1920 census, taken 2 years after his draft card, implies that he was born in 1878. So sometime between 1874 and 1881, he was possibly born in Ohio. Now, I couldn't find any birth certificates or anything to pin down his exact date of birth, and prison authorities noted that they didn't know his true birthday or his family history. His parents were both bohemians, and not the fun artistic writers living in communes, but the folks actually born in what we now consider part of the central and western regions of the Czech Republic. Ohio
and
had...
It's called that because that's what the region is called, right? They're the Bohemian region of what is essentially the Czech Republic, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're Bohemians, born in Bohemia. So Ohio actually had one of the largest settlements of immigrants from this region, and Bohemians actually began fleeing Europe for the United States in 1848. Many of these early immigrants, nicknamed the 48ers, fled persecution as revolutions and nationalism for and against the Habsburgs, the royal family in the region, caused all this instability. So this probably inspired the Jurko family to come to the United States and try to achieve, this American dream. Sometime in his youth, they decided they wanted to return to Europe. I couldn't find any documentation about this, on when he left, where he moved to. He told prison authorities later that he left his home somewhere around the age of 13, and he only had about 2 years of formal education. So some point in the early 1890s. And he noted that his mother died when he was 22 years old, which could have been around the turn of the century, and his father died 5 years later when he was 27 years old. In 1912, John married Teresa Kostenlich. Teresa was about 11 years younger than John, and she was from that same region and did not speak very much English. 2 years later, in 1914, the couple actually moved back to the United States. They had a daughter, but she died in infancy. In 1916, they moved to Twin Falls, Idaho, and I found an article in Nevada's White Pine News Weekly Mining Review that said a man named John Jurko, Jerko, not Jurko, along with Joe Tutakovich and George Stosik, were being fined $10 for contempt of court when they refused to testify before the judge in the case of the state of Nevada versus John Bacharach, charged with assault and battery. They didn't pay the fine. They were looking at 5 days in jail, and I couldn't find any follow-up about this assault. I couldn't find any information on who the assault was between. But I think that John may have actually been in Nevada around this time, trying to strike it rich as a miner in this area. Like most of us, though, he realized that it was just hard work that was going to find his riches. On his draft card taken in Twin Falls on September 12, 1918, John was described as short, medium build, blue eyes, and brown hair. He also had one leg and worked as a barber for Moses Ayers. He did have a wooden leg throughout his life, and I think most people were none the wiser that he only had one leg because he seemed pretty well equipped to walk on it. There's no information of how he lost his leg, though. I did not discover any of that. I found that there was a George Ayers who ran the OK Barbershop in Twin Falls, and George actually helped unionize all of the barbers in Twin Falls in October 1919. So John would have been joining that union and been speaking to a lot of these kind of leftist folks.
Was it a local union or was it like an IWW? Do you know?
It was a local union.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. Not a wobbly this time.
No. Now to step back, John Jurko's one leg. I don't know how he lost it. He had a wooden prosthetic. There's some mention that he may have lost it in Europe, and there's some mention that he may have been injured and had his head actually kicked pretty hard by a mule. That might come up later. So, an ad in the newspaper on November 14th, 1919 appeared for a, quote, comfortable 3-room house, furnished or unfurnished, owner leaving town, inquire at once, end quote. And John and Teresa did. And so they actually moved into a nice house in Twin Falls. And in 1920, John and Teresa were living at 337 Fifth Avenue East. They had boarders at their house, including a teamster, 2 laborers working construction, and a mason bricklayer. John was listed as the head of the household and served as a barber, while Tressie, or Teresa, I think they misspelled her name, did housework. And I can only imagine the conversations they had discussing labor and union membership in that household. In May 1922, John began to lease the Little Jewel Mine east of Oakley, Idaho, from a mining pioneer named George Myers in Basin, Idaho. He partnered up with a physician in town, Dr. Hubert W. Wilson, who had worked in the town since 1908. And Dr. Wilson, he actually had a similar issue as John. He had been shot in 1916 while serving in the Army on the Mexican border. We discuss Idaho's role in protecting the border during the Mexican Revolution between 1910 and 1920 in episode 70 with the Twin Falls Mayor Duncan Johnston. Dr. Wilson, he was down there, and he was actually walking along the border in 1916 with shiny new boots, as he described them. And a Mexican sniper shot him in the leg. And he spoke to a reporter and blamed it on these conspicuous-looking, brand-new, shiny boots that probably made him look like he was a commanding officer or something. Regardless, Dr. Wilson had a very weak leg, and it troubled him for the rest of his life. And the Twin Falls newspaper regularly talked about him being a hero and actually gave him a medal in the 30s. This is important. A write-up in the Oakley Herald called John Jurko a, quote, noted mining engineer who turned the famous Jarbridge mining claim a few years ago for $1.5 million, end quote. I don't know if we'd be telling this story if that was true. I did not find any sort of evidence that he was a millionaire. So we'll get more into that. But that's what this newspaper claimed about John Jurko. His lease arrangement with George Myers meant that George received 1/3 of any precious material that was mined. And I dug into this claim, pardon the pun, and found that their claim primarily contained porphyry quartz. How do you say that? Porphyry?
I don't know. I was wondering the same thing.
Basically, it's this quartz embedded within volcanic materials. I am not a geologist, so I apologize for all the geologists who were going, no! In 1923, John and his partner Martin Strand opened up the Jurko and Strand Barber Shop at 224 Main Avenue, a block away from the Orpheum Theater there in Twin Falls, and where the meat company stood. In November of that year, he was given a license to run a pool hall connected to his barber shop. And I'm not certain, but I think his shop is where the Rustic Pear Salon is today, and just a couple doors down from the Valley Kings Barber Shop. So if any listeners in Twin Falls, it's right around there. And this is a bit of a side story, but I think it's pertinent. In mid-August 1923, John's mining business partner, Dr. Wilson, was charged with adultery of Mrs. Edith Dooley. Her husband, Earl R. Dooley, the Twin Falls city chemist and former superintendent of the Filer Public Schools, called to sue Dr. Wilson for $50,000.
Wow.
1923. You know, this is during Prohibition. There's just, people need to let the steam out, I think. So Dr. Wilson was arrested and charged, but released on a $1,000 bond. And a few days later, on Sunday, August 19th, 1923, John Jurko and Dr. Wilson were at their mine near Oakley with a couple of mining experts to inspect the property. And John and a couple of the men went into the mine while Dr. Wilson stood outside. And while walking along a precipice, Dr. Wilson lost his balance on his weak leg and tumbled. A companion tried to catch him, but he fell down the Fairchild Canyon. He was knocked unconscious. His companions actually gathered him up. They rushed him to Oakley for medical attention, and then they drove him to Twin Falls in an ambulance. Despite his plummet, he survived and recovered. The following week, he appeared at the court and pled not guilty to adultery of Earl Dooley's wife. And I have to add that she was never charged with this crime. It was just Dr. Wilson. The tension between Dr. Wilson and Earl Dooley was not cooling, and on September 11th, 1923, the Twin Falls Times-News published a story on page 1. Felony charge filed against chemist Dooley, well-known expert arrested, charged with felonious assault on person of Dr. Hubert W. Wilson at his office at 10:30 Saturday night. Defendant released on bond to appear for preliminary hearing Monday at 10 a.m. The story actually documents that Earl Dooley entered Dr. Wilson's office with a druggist's steel pestle weighing about 1.75 pounds and began wailing at Dr. Wilson with it. Quote, the complaining witness is said to have suffered terrible cuts from which he is recovering, end quote. So while he's being beaten with this pestle, Mrs. Wilson happens to be there, and she starts yelling for help. And another doctor, along with John Jurko, rushed in and actually grabbed Earl. Quote, Jurko refused to talk when interviewed, saying that he was there and knew of the affair, but would say nothing, as he did not know whether the matter should be published or not, end quote. Which is just... do your own time, so do your own number.
Yeah, I was going to say he's doing his time, he's doing his number. He's not a rat. Come on, John Jurko.
It's so funny. It's funny that they even published that. I was so surprised. It just cracked me up that, he refused to say a word about the whole affair. Needless to say, Mrs. Dooley filed for divorce against Earl and was granted a final divorce based on cruelty on October 30th, 1923. Sadly, Earl continued to have bad luck as his 6-year-old, quote, dark red, chunky Irish setter, end quote, who answered to the name of Jack, was stolen a month later. Oh. Earl sold his Shetland pony and left town soon after. And I think the last place I found, he moved to New York. So why tell this wild story? Well, I think it's important to understand the circles that John is working in. And these folks that he and his wife are rubbing shoulders with, they are doctors and businessmen and pretty well known around town. He saw firsthand what adultery accusations could do. It drives a man to assault and to a divorce. That same year, John Jurko got into business with B.W. Vandenmark. Vandenmark has an equally interesting and difficult history to track. He was about 70 years old when he met John Jurko. Purportedly, he was a geological engineer for the United States government who visited Twin Falls in the early 1900s working as an agent for the U.S. Geological Survey, helping actually to develop the irrigation system, creating the Eden of the West, that is Twin Falls. In May, Vandenmark got a trim and a shave from John Jurko, kicking off the start of their relationship. And you know what? The barber in a town like Twin Falls, he would have known all the business going on in town. And so Vandenmark, he sees this immigrant, may be born in Ohio, but by all assuming outsiders, he is an immigrant who's just trying to make his way. And Vandenmark actually purchases the Stotts building in September 1923 for $7,000. It was originally the Twin Falls Meat Market, which Vandenmark actually paid to remodel the whole building. He leased it to John, and the two opened up the cozy billiard parlor. In October, John and Teresa moved into one of the apartments above the pool hall, and Vandenmark moved into the second room. And due to her lack of English, Teresa kind of spent most of her time preparing meals for John and Ann Vandenmark, while John tried to get the new pool hall off the ground, maintain the barber shop, and keep extracting from his mining claims. So he split so many different ways. Business was not picking up the way that Vandenmark thought they should. The two men had a falling out, and in June 1924, the Twin Falls City Council met, and Vandenmark stood before the council and demanded that no card tables be permitted in the barber shop that John ran. He told the commission that he was the sole owner of the property and the contents of the building. Quote, "I am not here to argue, but issue no license for tables in that building. If I want any licenses for tables there, I will apply for them myself," end quote. The city council said, John applied for him, and that was at the beginning of the year, and his license runs through July 1st. And Vandenmark was like, sure, but do not renew it. Their business fallout grew more serious when a notice of dissolution of partnership appeared in the Twin Falls Times News. Vandenmark was closing the cozy. He appointed a gentleman named C.P. Larceny as the new owner, ousting John, but continuing to operate the pool hall. This should have been the end of their business ventures together. While John worked most days and traveled to Oakley to tend his mining claims, Teresa spent all of her time at home, and Vandenmark began to make moves on Teresa, offering her money to leave John and join him. Tensions began to flare between the two. John's car broke down, preventing him from driving out to the mining claims, and on June 16, 1924, John and Teresa moved out of the apartments above the pool hall. Vandenmark was seen going through town flashing a gun and telling others he was going to shoot John, and tried to talk a man into poisoning some of John's whiskey. According to witnesses, he told one man, quote, "I'll get you some of these days," end quote, and called Jurko a, quote, "dirty son of a bitch," end quote, claiming that Jurko was, quote, "worth thousands of dollars to an undertaker," end quote. On June 24th, 1924, John worked away at his barber shop. He worked until about 6 o'clock, then left and stopped at the butcher's shop, and then the car shop, Frenchie's, to see if this car was fixed so he could make a trek out to his mines. The mechanic told him no, and then relayed that Vandenmark had opened the pool hall that afternoon and was angry at John and proclaimed that he planned to take the barber shop, the mine, and everything away from John. He asked John what he did to Vandenmark for him to say something like that, and John didn't know. He said that he stopped running the pool hall and started back to work at the barber shop. John returned home and sat down on his stoop when Teresa told him to come inside and have some supper. He didn't have an appetite. He told Teresa what he heard at the mechanic shop, and Teresa brought him inside and divulged all the pestering that Mr. Vandenmark had done. This is what John stated on the stand. Quote, "I went in the house and sat down on the chair at the table, and she was telling me all about it, what this old man tried to do. She says, The old man was over here yesterday and bothered me some more. He been bothering me since 2 weeks we move into that place and bothering me all the time. Says he went to give me $300 and send me to some place, and then he can fix his business up, and then he will leave and follow me. So he wanted to take her away from me. I says, what are you telling me? She says, I tell him I don't want him to come here bothering me anymore. So he says, I wish you would come with me and come down here and tell him not to bother me anymore. She says, I'm afraid to go out on the streets lots of times. So then, when she asked me, I put on my coat and I went. Teresa also recounted a time when John went to the mine in Oakley and stayed overnight, and Vandenmark knocked on the door at their house at 11 p.m. to wake her up. He told her John was no good for her and, quote, he can't show you no good times, end quote. He pestered her repeatedly that if she left John, he would give her money, wrap up business in Twin Falls, and follow her. Later on in the witness stand, Teresa stated in broken English, quote, Mr. Vandenmark, he came to my house that same day, and my front door was open, and he stepped in the front room, and there was an open screen door, and he hollered at me. I was not there. I was in the kitchen, and he says, Mrs. Jurko, and I was scared, and I said, what is it? He said, Don't you change your mind? I says, change my mind for what? He says, you leave your husband. And I says, no, sir. I says, get out of this house as soon as you can. I says, or I kill you right here. And he went out.
Well, and this is so, unfortunately, probably such a common thing, especially for immigrant women who are often in a place where the only person they know and can communicate with is their husband and or their immediate family. And it leaves them vulnerable against people like this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Teresa is relaying all of this to John, and he's been hearing whispers around town. Vandenmark's not making any of these threats directly, but he's hearing them all secondhand. And now this guy that she's been preparing food for, that they were living in this shared apartment, and he's sending these rumors around town that they're having an affair and that he's going to kill John and all this stuff. So John is like, okay, that's it. I'm going to go confront him. So he puts on his jacket and he walks to the pool hall, and he comes face to face with his former business partner. John and Teresa walked into the pool hall where several men were drinking, playing cards, and enjoying themselves. He called to Vandenmark, come here. I want you to tell me what you said about my wife. Vandenmark continued playing cards with his friends. John said again, I came in here to make you take back what you said about my wife. To this, Vandenmark stood up. No man can say he has been f***ing my wife and get away with it.
Wait. Sorry, pause. That was real? Like, that actually said that in one of the transcripts?
This season has so many F words, Skye. I've
no way.
Yeah, no, legit, they're actually, yeah.
See, they used that word back then. People say they didn't, but oh man, they did. Okay, anyway, sorry. Okay.
Vandenmark, standing about 6 feet from John and still holding the cards in his left hand, brushed off John with his right hand in the direction of the door. On the stand, John would state that Vandenmark said, I'd fix you, and reached for a gun in his hip pocket. Other witnesses only saw Vandenmark wave his hand dismissively towards the door. Regardless, John pulled the gun from his pocket and began firing. Quote, one of the bullets struck a table, bounced from there to the wall behind Vandenmark, glanced from there to an opposite wall, and fell to the floor. One of the bullets struck the victim in the right side of the stomach, one near the right shoulder, one to the left hip, and one high on the left side. One bullet cut the index finger on the right hand, and another struck the stone of the large emerald ring which Vandenmark wore on the third finger of the left hand, smashing it to pieces. 2 of the bullets passed through the body of Vandenmark, and it was either one of these or one of the 2 that struck his fingers that took the glancing course, end quote.
Whoa.
Vandenmark had been sitting at this little table playing rummy. There were several witnesses in the bar that watched this go down. John turned around and went to the police station and turned himself in and began claiming he acted in self-defense. Impaneling a jury for Jurko's trial was difficult. Vandenmark's murder was a big story. Finally, 11 men were picked from a panel of 41. Jurko's lawyer made it clear that he would be claiming self-defense and highlighting the threats Vandenmark made against him. 4 witnesses for the defense said on the stand that Vandenmark had displayed a pistol on several occasions and said he was going to get John before John got him. 4 other witnesses told a story about Vandenmark entering a cigar shop, clearly intoxicated, pulling out a gun and setting it on the counter and asking patrons to go with him as to show them how yellow Jurko was. While John was on the stand, he explained how their business deal fell through. One day, Vandenmark came into the pool hall and was really upset with John, saying business wasn't good enough. John said he was doing his best. Vandenmark ordered up a cider, left. When he returned, told John he wanted to sell him the business. John was happy to do it, but told Vandenmark, quote, "I ain't got no cash money to pay you unless you're going to let me pay out on payments," end quote. Vandenmark calculated how much John would owe him and went to the bank to create a bill of sale contract. Several days later, Vandenmark told John he changed his mind and now was actually going to raise his rent by $25. John said he couldn't afford that, and Vandenmark got upset and said, "I have got a notion to blow your head off." John responded, "I ain't done nothing to you to blow my head off." Vandenmark replied, "I'll get you yet." A few days later, Vandenmark came into the pool hall and told John, "I got a notion to shoot the lights up and then shoot the rest of the house." John asked a fellow named Billy Donnelly to follow Vandenmark and take the gun from him, but Billy was nervous, it was cocked, and he'd end up getting shot. A policeman was walking outside, and John ran out and told him what Vandenmark said. The officer promised to look around. John recounted all the times he saw Vandenmark watching him while he was alone, cleaning up the pool hall and even his barber shop. Quote, "On the 25th of June, while I was there working in my barber shop, I saw Mr. Vandenmark in front of the door. I saw him once before noon, and then that evening I saw him standing there looking at me for about 4 or 5 minutes. Nobody was with him. He just stood there and looked, shook his head, and looked at me," end quote. Other witnesses signed notarized depositions stating Vandenmark threatened John's life, and he was going to take John's barbershop and mine from him. At trial, Judge Babcock told the jury, quote, "In relation to the law of self-defense, one cannot claim its benefits after he has intentionally put himself where he knows or believes he has to invoke its aid. If the defendant sought a meeting with the deceased for the purpose of provoking a difficulty with said deceased, then he would not be permitted to justify on the ground of self-defense," end quote. Obviously, he came in with the gun, confronting this individual, and pulled it out and shot and killed him. John actually said on the stand that he thought that Vandenmark was actually reaching into his pocket to pull out a weapon. Witnesses for the prosecution insisted Vandenmark was unarmed and made no aggressive moves before the shooting. Several also recalled Jurko's anger and purposeful approach to Vandenmark. It took the jury 6 hours of deliberation. They found him guilty of first-degree murder, and they actually recommended the death penalty. This was a surprise to everybody. The rumors, everything that had been going on through the town, everybody thought that he would, at the most, get like a life sentence, maybe, but likely might even have a hung jury and might get off because of everything that had happened between him and Vandenmark. He is brought to the Idaho State Penitentiary. John Jurko, number 3416, arrives at the penitentiary on October 7, 1924, from Twin Falls County. His crime, murder in the first degree, sentence death. He's 50 years old, born in Ohio, 5 foot 10 and 7/8 inches tall. He had a medium complexion. He was 162.5 pounds, had light brown hair, blue eyes, was 50 years old. He had one child who died in infancy. His parents died when he was 22 and 27. He left home at the age of 13. He had no religious instruction, didn't attend Sunday school, and was never a member of a church. Honestly, he was probably just too busy. He could read and write and attend school for 2 years. He said he was a moderate drinker. He had no former imprisonment. His nearest relative was his wife, Teresa Jurko, in Twin Falls, with a note, quote, "Wife who is Slav," end quote. His build was stout, his teeth were in fair condition, he wore no beard, and entered the prison with $15 in his pocket. He also noted that he lived in Idaho for 8 years. His Bertillon showed a cut scar between his eyebrows, and his left leg was amputated about halfway down the shin below his knee. Warden Snook noted that he had a, quote, very hairy chest and body, end quote. So his attorneys appealed immediately, claiming he had been kicked in the head by a mule years earlier and suffered periods of excitability that affected his mental balance. They argued that he had been provoked and denied a fair trial. The Idaho Supreme Court acknowledged minor trial errors but upheld the conviction. The Board of Pardons appointed a, quote, sanity board, end quote, but doctors, including Dr. Collister, found him sane. The Idaho Citizen, an independent community paper in Twin Falls, published an article on May 7, 1926, titled Bargains in Human Hides, that was vehemently against John's attempt at a new trial and commutation. Quote, someone should find commercial use for human hides. They are getting so cheap. It is getting to be a popular indoor sport to plug a defenseless fellow being with a 6-gun. Nobody seems to make any particular fuss about it. Human life is one of the special attractions on the bargain counter these days. We are not talking about a condition that exists in the congested foreign districts of our great cities. We are speaking in terms of Twin Falls County. News dispatches carry the very refreshing information that after nearly 2 years of perpetual expense to the state, Jurko, who was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to hang, will soon be returned to Twin Falls to have the day of his execution reset. It is a travesty on human justice when cold-blooded murder can go unpunished for years. This man, who thought no more of the life of a fellow being than he did that of a stray cat, still has a 50-50 chance or better to be turned scot-free to practice on another human target. He will now seek to have the State Pardon Board commute his sentence to imprisonment for life, which, if granted, will, according to the usual procedure, terminate in a short time in a pardon. Just so long as our scheme of justice makes a condition of this kind possible, just so long human life will be cheap and human hides a drug on the market, 90 days is usually ample time in which to give a man accused of murder a fair trial, and if found guilty, his case should be forever disposed of without further delay. England often takes only 60 days to dispose of murder cases, and human life is not nearly as cheap under her system of justice as it is under ours. We wonder if the Pardon Board of Idaho will assume that they have a right to change the verdict of the courts in the Jurko case and add their influence to the cheapening of human life. Time will tell. On November 4th, 1925, Teresa wrote a letter from Cheyenne, Wyoming, asking about John. Quote, I have had no news of him since leaving Twin Falls, Idaho in June. I would like to know if his sentence was changed, end quote. Warden Wheeler actually responded that John was still awaiting the Supreme Court, so nothing had changed, and more revealing, quote, I am of the opinion that the reason you have not heard from him is because he did not know where to address you, end quote. So she leaves town, and John doesn't have her address, doesn't know where she goes. I don't know. That kind of popped up some red flags for me. Yeah. I kind of wonder if there was a little bit of a feeling of neglect that she had because he worked all day and all over, and
loneliness,
yeah,
tension.
Totally. And then now he's gone in and killed this business partner, and now talk about being lonely and dejected, and man. On the night before his execution, July 8th, 1926, John stated to journalists, quote, this crime I did was pushed on me. This man broke my heart. I lost my head and killed him. For this, I must die, end quote. He had his last meal and hoped for a last-minute reprieve by the governor. As he approached the gallows, John said, quote, no mercy, no justice, but I forgive everyone, end quote. Just after midnight on July 9th, 1926, John fell through the trap door. He officially died at 12:14 a.m. The next day, William McBratney from the funeral home provided an invoice to the warden of $64.03 for funeral expenses, including a casket, outside box, care of body, hearse, and cemetery charge at Morris Hill Cemetery. On July 12th, 3 days after the execution, Reverend C.E. Burgess, chairman of the executive committee of the Idaho Sunday School Council of Religious Education, sent a check for $64.03 to Warden Wheeler to cover the cost of John Jurko's burial. He included a letter and noted, quote, "I feel that you carried out your part of this most difficult and trying task in a commendable and humane manner. This execution convicted me more and more that there is little use in capital punishment. I believe especially in the light of the fine lives of one or two of your men who are lifers at the state that the ends of justice can usually be met through life," end quote. Warden Wheeler responded in thanks for the group's assistance in, quote, "discharging a most solemn duty," end quote, and offered to answer any questions or table any concerns about penal work. An autopsy later done on John Jurko's body revealed a skull fracture with inflammation of the brain tissue underneath, likely causing the emotional and behavioral issues. Soon after the murder of Van and Mark, Twin Falls District Attorney E.V. Larceny actually went through Van and Mark's possessions, and many of his items were engraved with the initials ABB, along with correspondence to and from an attorney in Los Angeles. The attorney confirmed the handwriting and belongings matched to those of A.B. Baird, a man who had disappeared from California in 1923, right as A.B. Van and Mark appears in Twin Falls, Idaho. So I actually started digging into Baird, and I found several newspaper articles in Arizona and California describing A.B. Baird as a, quote, "well-known geologist, oil man, petroleum geologist, and the discoverer of the Holbrook, Arizona anticline oil fields," end quote. He often used the tagline, quote, "educated in the school of experience," end quote, which I love. That should be on every business card. And he placed ads in newspapers seeking investors, promising that even 50 cents would make somebody rich. Now, whether Baird came to Idaho to start over or to hide from his past remains a mystery. He had thousands and thousands of dollars in his accounts. It's certain that by the time that he met John Jurko, whatever name he went by, Baird or Van and Mark, he became the man Jurko accused of breaking his heart and the reason he would ultimately hang. In 1951, this is one of those interesting things that you find in the prison files here. A journalist from the Standard Times in New Bedford, Massachusetts, was working on a story about a prisoner up for execution in their state who had been on death row the longest. And H.P. Fales, who headed the Bureau of Identification at the Old Pen at the time in 1951, dug through the records and concluded that John Jurko actually spent the longest of anyone on death row in Idaho, nearly 2 years between his arrival on October 7, 1924, and his final execution on July 9, 1926. John continued to hold this record, but we know it is no longer the case today. As of this recording, there are 8 men and 1 woman awaiting their executions in Idaho. Thomas Creech, whose execution failed last year, has been incarcerated since January 1983, 42 years. The Idaho Department of Corrections has images of the former execution chamber, the witness room, F block, and other elements of capital punishment as of October 1924. And you can actually visit the website idoc.idaho.gov and see mugshots of all 9 individuals and the death chamber. Beginning July 1st, 2026, firing squad will be the primary means of execution in Idaho. And I imagine...
Forgot about that.
Yeah, images of the new firing squad chamber will be made available on their website, along with updated execution standard operating procedures and everything else for anyone who's interested in this topic. But that is the quick and dirty rundown of John Jurko. Still so many questions. Tried not to go too deep into everything else, but a man who suffered from a broken heart and an argument over business and took another man's life over accusations of adultery.
Well, good job, Anthony. That's a hard story.
Yeah.
It's a hard story.
Wow. Well,
with many of these individuals and these circumstances, that there are claims made that it's just so hard to know whether the prosecution or the defense. And so to have an autopsy be able to reveal, he did have a skull fracture. He did have swelling in his brain. This might have contributed to his irrational behavior.
Yeah.
Like, that is both, it's powerful to know that, but it's also kind of tough to know that too.
Yeah, and, there's this element of him being, he and his wife not being Americans, not being English speakers, And that impacted, how the jury, how the town viewed him.
Yeah.
We're coming out of World War I and the Russian Revolution.
First Red Scare.
Yeah, exactly, the Red Scare. So those would have impacted, and I'm curious if this had been at a different time, if this crime had been at a different time, if he would have been acquitted, if he would have been found guilty in the first place. There's so many elements. His story, I mean, he admitted freely that he did walk up and he fired 6 shots. It was a brutal, heinous assassination of a man who's sitting at a table playing cards. So I mean, he needed to be punished. There's just so many difficult elements to this, and it's hard not to have some empathy for John Jurko in this, as your business partner is basically trying to take away everything that you've spent 8 years in Twin Falls building, and here he is. He's upset that the returns on this pool hall aren't big enough, and now I'm gonna close down your barbershop. I'm gonna take your mine. I'm gonna poison you. I've got to, I'm gonna hire somebody to kill you. You're worth more to an undertaker. Like all these really heartbreaking quotes, between two men that hit it off over a shave and a haircut. Yeah, it's just, man.
Yeah.
Well,
it's
and
crazy.
tried to take his wife too. Like that is for many men, especially back then. And I don't know what Czech attitudes towards marriage are, but if they're any different than ours. But like I would imagine he took that very personally as well.
Yeah, your manhood is all tied to it.
Well,
Well, thank you guys.
Great job as usual.
Thank you. And
Good to be back.
well, Skye, what do you have for us today?
Oh, man. So, to start off our new season, and because I knew you were going to be covering a particularly difficult story, I wanted to do something a little bit different and hopefully change the mood a little bit. So, I'm actually going to cover 3 women at the same time because they were all part of the same crime, and maybe, but probably not, part of an automobile theft gang. So, today I am covering number 2539, Matilda Hatfield, number 2540, Ellen Pappas, and number 2541, Martha Chrisman. So obviously telling 3 stories at once can be really difficult. So bear with me, let me know if anything gets confusing, and I'll try to keep it all straight. We're going to start with their pre-crime lives, and I'll go in numerical order. Today, we are going to start with number 2539, Matilda Hatfield. She was born Matilda Walsworth on November 12th, 1885, near Boulder, Colorado, and as we often find, other records variably list her birth year as 1884, 1885, and 1886, but I think 85 is the right year. Her parents were Edward Walsworth, an English immigrant, and Annie Walsworth. Edward was a coal miner, and mining, of course, is a massive industry in Colorado in the West in the 1880s, specializing in Colorado in coal, precious metals, especially silver and other metal ores. Matilda was the 3rd children of 4, I think. The records are a little bit unclear about her siblings because, and I'm sure you've seen this happen, when different children are listed in the house at different times and none of the siblings are listed together on the same document. Like it's like 2 on this one and 4 on this one, and then, names you hadn't seen before on one that comes several years later. So
confusing.
I know, so confusing. So she's got an older brother, James, in the 1880 federal census. She then has an older sister, Annie Jr., in the 1885 Colorado census, and then a younger brother, Thomas, in the 1900 federal census. At some point, I think her father dies because I can't find any record of him after a certain point, though I never found his death record. So after his potential death, her mother will remarry a man named John Hill in 1891. Then Annie Sr. and John Hill have a daughter in 1896 whom they also name Annie.
Oh.
So, according to censuses from years later, Annie Sr. stated that she had 5 children, but only 4 were alive. And I can definitively find the last 3 altogether. So Thomas, Matilda, and Annie Jr., the second Annie Jr. I find them all together. So if the daughter of Annie Sr. and John Hill is also named Annie, that could indicate that the Annie Jr. from the 1885 Colorado census that I found earlier may have passed away at some point.
Okay.
But I'm not completely sure. Like, I couldn't verify that. I couldn't find a death record for that other Annie or any other records for that first Annie Jr. And that's actually, this is going to be, as is often the case, the theme of this episode, where we have a lot of these little details that sort of fit together, and then you seem to be kind of missing a piece here and there. So by the 1900 census, the family relocated to Red Lodge, Montana, which is in the south central part of the state, just north of the Wyoming border. The next records of Matilda are those on her marriage record from August 15th, 1902, to a man named Rocky Hatfield. These records list her as 20 years old, born in 1882. But because all of the records that list her birth year between 1884 and 1886, I think she was probably closer to between the ages of 16 and 18 and probably had to lie about her age to get married. So then, according to newspaper records, Rocky, her husband, was the first boy born in the town of Red Lodge. So his family is old pioneer stock. So by 1906, according to the newspaper, the Carbon County Republican, Rocky and Matilda were, quote, popular and well-known citizens, end quote. Rocky worked in the mining industry, which is great that that's his name. And then he later worked as a well driller. The couple lived in Belfry, Montana, about 16 miles east of Red Lodge, and I found this fun little fact on Wikipedia and verified it, and it's just simply too amazing to not include. So the mascot of the main school, the K-12 school in town, is the Bats. So they're the Belfry Bats.
That's cute.
Cool.
I love that. Okay, anyway, I had to write that down. So Rocky and Matilda had a son, Floyd, who was born in April 1908, and a daughter, Vivian, who was born in August 1912. Then almost a year later, about 10 months later, in June 1913, Floyd, their son, starts to complain of stomach pains. But kids get sick, and then a few days after first showing symptoms, he is quite suddenly seized with really violent pains. They take him to the hospital. The doctors treat him surgically, but it turns out that Floyd had been suffering from appendicitis, and his appendix had burst and turned gangrenous. And unfortunately, Floyd died on June 23rd, 1913.
That's so scary. Oh my gosh. We just have this ticking time bomb in us. It always freaks me out.
Oh my gosh, yes. If you get stomach pains, please go do something about it. Yeah. Please go to the doctor. Please, please, please. So a few days later, a small card of thanks was published in 2 different newspapers, the Pickett Journal and the Carbon County Republican, and it said this, quote, "We desire to thank the Brotherhood of American Yeomen and other friends for their help and kindness during the sickness, death, and burial of our little son, Floyd Hatfield," end quote. And he would have been just 5 years old when he died. And that note is signed Mr. and Mrs. Rocky Hatfield. So a quick side note, the Brotherhood of American Yeomen, it was a secret fraternal benefit organization founded in 1897. And it basically worked as a sort of local mutual aid insurance association that kind of furnished protection, especially for the family. So it kind of sounds like if, because their child died, they were able to take advantage of the funds that were available to them through the Brotherhood of American Yeomen. So with this very unfortunate death of her son, this is where we are going to leave Matilda's story for now. We're going on to our second, number 2540, Ellen Pappas. And I don't quite have as much on Ellen's early life as I do on Matilda's. So Ellen was born Zella Diet on October 10th, 1896 or 1897 in Rock Springs, Wyoming. So in all fairness, I'm not exactly sure if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. The spelling is Dyett, and I feel that would sort of insinuate it's pronounced like diet. But on her intake form, it appears that they spelled it out phonetically, and the way they wrote it out is Deyatt, which I would probably pronounce that Dyett. So I'm not really sure there. But Regardless, Zella, or Ellen, is the third of 7 kids born to Joseph and Katie, or Catherine, Dyatt, both Scottish immigrants. And it's actually cute because they know each other in Scotland. They separately immigrate to the United States, and then they find each other and get married, which is kind of cute.
I love it.
I know. She's got 2 older sisters, Margaret and Martha, 3 younger brothers, William, Joseph, and Andrew, and a younger sister, Clara, all in that order. So 3 girls, 3 boys, and 1 girl. And this might not come as a surprise with that many kids, but according to her intake form, the Dyatt family were Mormons. Not sure if her parents were Mormons in Scotland or if they joined the church when they moved to the West. And in fact, Joseph and Katie get married in Utah. So it may have been that they convert in Scotland, both come over and then get married when they reach the quote-unquote promised land. I don't know. But I did, of course, because I'm a little historian now, I had to do a little bit of a dig into this. But by this time, the LDS Church did have a fairly substantial number of converts from the British Isles, including Scotland. The number I found was that 100,000 British converts immigrated to the U.S., and that by 1870, nearly half of Utah's population were British immigrants. I couldn't find the exact number of Scottish immigrants, but of course at this time, I think using British meant Scotland and often Ireland, though that is, of course, problematic in its own way. But so they were probably part of that 100,000 of those converts who came over.
That's okay, my family. Anyway. They came from Wales.
Yeah, my family had a lot of Brits and individuals from Scotland coming over with the Mormon pioneers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I had my family were British and came over from England and went across the plains, and some of them died. It's again crazy what some of those folks went through.
Were your ancestors LDS, Skye?
Yes. So I actually had so there's the story of the Martin and Willie handcart companies. Yeah. They're the ones who left really late, and so a big chunk. I don't know the exact number, but a big group of them died because they were essentially crossing the plains in the middle of winter. And I had one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, or probably several more greats, I don't know how many back, but they actually were in the Willie handcart company, or maybe the Martin one. Yeah. So they were part of that.
And mine was the one just before that.
Okay, so yeah, you guys
your family
escaped
was
that
fine.
fate.
We just barely made it, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if they had like been included in one of the handcart companies that went before, or if they were part of the Willie or Martin. Not sure, but the family does kind of seem to be among those who convert in the British Isles and then immigrate to the U.S. and then travel west, which is so brave. I don't know if I could have done that.
Jeez.
So anyway,
that would have been hard.
Her intake form says she only attended school until the 3rd grade, but the 1910 census lists 12-year-old Zella as attending school, which would probably be closer to 6th or 7th grade. So unless she, of course, it is possible that she didn't get to go to school very often for whatever reason, but that's kind of a contradictory thing there. She also says that she left her parents' home when she was 13, but both of her parents were still living when she entered prison. So if she did leave at 13, the reason for that fact is not clear. Often young women especially leave homes really early if their parents die. Maybe she also had to go to work. I'm not sure. That's kind of all I have about Ellen Pappas's pre-prison life. I have more information about her post-penitentiary life, but she was pretty hard to track down. Her intake form also said that her quote-unquote true name was Ellen Papa, but I couldn't find any records to verify that. So that is 2 done. So our last one is number 2541, Martha Chrisman. She was born Martha Miller on August 16th, 1888 in Rock Spring, Wyoming. She is the oldest daughter of David and Martha Miller. So in other words, our Martha is a Martha Jr. And just like Ellen's parents, Martha's parents were also Scottish immigrants. Oh, and get this, Martha Sr.'s maiden name is Dyatt.
Interesting.
So Martha's mother, Martha Sr., was the younger sister of Ellen's father, Joseph. So Martha and Ellen are cousins.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Good catch, Skye.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. I always love to look up maiden names. Obviously, the women's family deserve their credit as well, but I found that and I was like, okay, here we go. This is going to help a little bit in connecting all of these folks to the crime, but honestly, not as much as you would hope. So just like we kind of see for the other women, Martha's father was a miner for most of his life, which, of course, as we know, is an incredibly hard knock life. And again, records aren't totally clear on how many siblings she had. I think it was between 4 and 7. And this is, again, another instance where I see chunks of kids on certain censuses and some on others, but you never see them together. So on the 1900 census, her mother says she was the mother of 5 children total. But again, only 4 of them are still living. And then I can't find another census for the family until 1920. So I'm missing 20 years of census stuff, which is very much possible for them to have a child, have it grow up, get married, or leave the house and not be included on the censuses I could find. So again, according to her intake form, she attended school until the 6th grade, and like her cousin Ellen, she grew up in the LDS church. Just like her cousin, she claimed she left her parents' home at a very young age, 14, according to her. Again, if this is the case, I'm not really sure why or what she did for the next 4 years, but the next I find her is on August 13th, 1905, 3 days before her 18th birthday. Martha married a young local farmer named Emsley Chrisman. Emsley was only about 5 years older than her, so thankfully a normal age gap, which of course is not always the case on this podcast or for women historically. After marrying Emsley, it looks like they moved into the home of Emsley's parents along what's called the Hams Fork River in Uinta County, Wyoming. Then in January 1906, Martha's father died of something called colloquially as miner's consumption. Akin to consumption, where consumption often meant tuberculosis, this is an old term to use the sort of general wasting away that many miners faced after years of breathing in coal, ore, and dust particles and spending so much time in the dark inside of the earth. So it could be tuberculosis, but it could also take the form of other lung diseases like asthma or pulmonary disease. So they kind of use miner's consumption as a sort of larger catch-all term. But again, mining is a hard occupation, especially in the early 1900s. I think production is really starting to ramp up and industrialization is really starting to take hold, and conditions are getting very dangerous. We are about to enter, or starting to be, in the progressive era where some of these working conditions are going to change. But mining, just so tough. That's all I've got for Martha's pre-life as well. She's married by then, and then her father dies. So that then brings us to the crime. And unfortunately, I don't really have that much about the crime either. But the first and also main newspaper article that reported on the crime came from the Idaho Statesman on September 10th, 1917. The subtitle of the article says, 5 caught in store and auto thefts arrive from Blackfoot. Former Boise boy is taken with gang. So I read the subtitle and I was like, yes, auto theft gang, I am in. But we'll have to see if it's really as exciting as we all might hope that it is. So according to this first article, our ladies Matilda, Ellen, and Martha were with 3 men named Joe Kelly, Clayton Gardner, and Temple O. Smith Jr. So they're with them on September 4th, 1917. Altogether, the 6 of them start what ends up being a sort of robbery spree in McKay, Idaho, which is central Idaho, about 35 miles east of Ketchum and Sun Valley, so right kind of central. And here in McKay, they allegedly steal goods from a store before then stealing a car and taking off. They head south on Highway 93 towards Arco, stopping in a tiny town called Moore to steal another car, and then they continued south toward Blackfoot. As they near a neighborhood just outside of Blackfoot called Tabor, the car broke down, so 2 of the men, and it doesn't make clear which of the 2 men, they hitch a ride into Blackfoot, and the remaining man and the 3 women wait in the woods for the 2 men to come back. So once in Blackfoot, the 2 men steal a car, go back to pick up the other 4, and then they continue moving south, first to Pocatello and then to Ogden, Utah. Once in Ogden, the men tried to sell some of the stolen goods, and they were promptly arrested. And then this is all the more the description that the newspaper had for how the women got caught. It says, then, quote, the women made inquiries about the men, and then they were taken into custody, end quote. Who did they inquire to? How long had the men been missing? Did they look suspicious? I have many questions.
Always.
But I know, just like you said, where you're just like, I have many questions. But unfortunately, that is all we really know about the crime. And so now, the main piece that seems to be missing from, many pieces, but really kind of the biggest piece that seems to be missing from the story is how all three of these women, and really how 6 of these accomplices ended up together. Because there is honestly no point on paper I could find that links them all together. So again, I think this sort of shows the limitations of the research that we can do with these public records, because that's the only way it can connect them. But clearly they have some connection, which is not quantifiable on paper, at least not in the records that I have. So here's at least the quick description of the 3 men who were involved. So first is a man named Clayton Gardner. Gardner was a cook and a waiter born in Washington, but he ends up living north in Lewiston, Idaho in 1900. But according to the newspaper, he had recently lived in Boise working at a Main Street diner. Then there's a guy named Joe Kelly, who allegedly his real name is George A. Miller, which is probably the only harder name to find than Joe Kelly. But I did actually find him. He was a butter maker in Chicago in 1893, and according to him, he'd only lived in Idaho for about 4 months. Doesn't say where in Idaho, but had moved there not long before. And then lastly, Temple O. Smith Jr. is a 17-year-old son of a grocer from Indiana who is living in Pocatello. So in studying what I could about everyone involved, here's what I found. Here's how I kind of tried to figure out how they all became connected. So, of course, Ellen and Martha are cousins. They're both from Wyoming in towns quite close to each other. All 3 of the men are from Idaho, but Clayton was from Boise, I think. Temple was from Pocatello, and Joe's location is never made clear. Matilda Hatfield lived just north of Wyoming, but Ellen and Martha were from the southern part of Wyoming. Matilda did have a connection to Pocatello because on her intake form, her nearest relatives, who are her stepfather and mother, live in Pocatello, but I'm not sure if Matilda ever lived there herself. Really, the only thing that they all seem to have in common is that they're kind of grouped around the same ages. So Matilda is 32 years old and Clayton Gardner was 34. Ellen Pappas and Joe Kelly were both 21. There's actually both Martha and Temple are outliers. Martha is 29, so I guess she could kind of be grouped around Matilda and Clayton, who were in their 30s. But Temple is, as I mentioned, the biggest outlier. He's the youngest. He's just 17 years old. So significantly younger than Matilda, than Clayton, and even Martha. Like Ellen and Joe were closer to his age, but even then. So there's no, as far as I can find, no common religion between them, no family situation that's similar between any of them. Again, nothing that I can glean solely from these impersonal archival records. So with that, I then looked into this gang business, but I'm afraid to say that, as I often do, I got real pulled in by a headline and did not pan out. I searched like Auto Gang, I searched all around this time to find their names, but there don't seem to be any mentions of any newspapers I could find of these conspirators having participated in any crime, and any related crime prior to September 1917. I think the journalists just used it to describe the group altogether rather than them actually being a gang. And then in my notes I wrote sad face emoji. So after being arrested and returned to Bingham County Court from Utah, everyone pleaded guilty to the charges of grand larceny. Temple, the youngest, would change his plea to not guilty right before the sentencing, and because he's only 17, his sentence would actually be deferred. The rest, however, were given indeterminate sentences of between 1 and 14 years at the Idaho State Penitentiary for the crime of grand larceny. And so Matilda Hatfield, Ellen Pappas, Martha Chrisman, Clayton Gardner, and Joe Kelly arrived at the penitentiary on September 9th, 1917. So their intake forms, I'll try to be quick through these. So we'll start, of course, with Matilda Hatfield, number 2539. She is 32 years old, born in Campfield, Colorado. Legitimate occupation housekeeper, height 5 feet 3 inches, complexion medium, weight 115, color of hair brown, color of eyes blue. It says conjugal relations separated for 3 years, has one girl, age 5. Neither of her parents are living. Her father died when she was 29, her mother when she was 32, and she says she left her parents' home when she was 16 years old. She had religious instruction and attended Sunday school in the Methodist Episcopal Church, but didn't go to any churches. By that point, could read and write. Again, it says she attended school until the 4th grade and was a moderate drinker. John Hill, who is her stepfather, is listed as her nearest relative. Regular, no peculiarities in build or feature. Condition of teeth, good. Size of boot, worn 4. Her father was born in England, her mother in the U.S., but doesn't know what port her father came through, and then has lived in Idaho for 3 years from Red Lodge, Montana. It says that she'd been in Idaho for 3 years, which means she would have moved there about 1914, which is about a year after her son Floyd died. And according to the timeline, that would also be the same time she separated from her husband. So clearly, her son's death was very, very tough on them as a couple and as a family. So then on to Ellen Pappas's, number 2540. She is 21, born in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Legitimate occupation, housekeeper. She is 5 feet 2 and 5/8 inches, complexion medium, weight also 115. Color of hair, dark brown. Color of eyes, dark brown. She is married. Both of her parents were living. Says she left her parents' home when she was 13. Again, had religious instruction and attended Sunday school and was still part of the LDS Church. Can read and write. Left school until the 3rd grade. Also a moderate drinker. Her father and mother are listed as her nearest relatives. Condition of teeth, fair. Size of boot, worn 4. Parents born in Scotland and has lived in Idaho for 1 year. So if that was the case, she probably moved there in 1960. Not sure where she moved from. It also said that she was married, but I never found any records of her marriage, who she would have been married to, if Pappas was the last name of her husband, but she never uses this name before or after. So not sure who she is married to there. And last but not least is our number 2541, Martha Chrisman, age 29, born in Rock Springs. Legitimate occupation, housekeeper, 5 foot 3 and 7/8 inches, complexion dark, weight 160, color of hair black, color of eyes gray. This one says separated for 3 months. Father living, no, died when she was about 18. Mother still living, left her parents' home when she was 14. Again, had religious instruction in Sunday school and was still part of the LDS Church. Could read and write, went to school until 6th grade, and again also listed herself as a moderate drinker. So her name and address of nearest relative is kind of interesting. So her husband, Emsley Chrisman, is named. He lives in Frontier, Wyoming. Also lists her mother, whose name is now John Bechtold. So she also has a stepfather. And then it also lists someone named Herbert Beechler in Hams Fork, Wyoming. I'm going to get into this quick. So the connection to Herbert Beechler, or even exactly who Herbert Beechler is unclear. So according to my search through available ancestry records, there is a Herbert Beechler born in 1917 in Frontier, Wyoming. Frontier is just south of Hams Fork, which is what's listed on her intake form. But the census records of this Herbert Beechler list him as the son of Walter and Sarah Beechler, one of several children. And I can't find any connections through these ancestry records between Martha and this Beechler family. So in sort of taking these pieces and putting them together and making assumptions, I feel that it would kind of make it seem that Herbert was maybe her own child that she then had to give away to the Beechler family. But I also don't want to make that accusation against the Beechler family at all, because again, I couldn't find any actual records of connections between them. So in the parlance of electronic communication, shrug emoji.
Yeah. Do you know what Herbert Beechler's dad?
So it listed him as the son of Walter Beechler. I would assume if it was an adoption situation, I would assume that Emsley was the father, because we don't have any other connection to her. I mean, otherwise she'd only been separated from her husband for 3 months, according to her own intake, which is not long enough to, like, if she found out that, you know, if she got pregnant by someone else and Emsley found out, that's not quite long enough to, like, I don't know. It's possible, of course, like anything is possible. It just is one of those weird things where there are details that do line up with this Herbert Beechler, but I also don't want to say that that's definitively what happened, because I can't say that for sure. Condition of her teeth are good. Size of boot worn also 4. All 3 of these ladies wear size 4 boot. Parents born in Scotland and has lived in Idaho for 2 months, which is a month less than she'd been separated from her husband. So timing is weird. And of course, they can lie on these things. But so yeah, intake forms for all 3 of our ladies.
Skye, you were trying to find something they all had in common, and they all wear size 4
yeah,
boots.
I guess so.
Maybe they met
I
at
guess
the store.
The size 4 shoe convention, they were like, no way, me too. Let's commit crimes together. Yeah. So when they entered the women's ward, these 3 more than doubled the population. There were only 2 other women in there with them. They joined, and ironically, both of the other ladies, their names were Cora. So we had Cora Dunn, who was in for obtaining property under false pretenses, and Cora Atkinson, who was in for grand larceny. It was an alleged cattle theft that I covered in episode 84. And then they would actually be joined by one other inmate named Dora Harville, who was in for rape. This is a really tough story that eventually we'll touch on. And that was about 2 months after they entered, but it's really the 6 of them in there. As usual, we don't know that much about their time in prison. It was pretty short-lived, though. So they entered the prison in September 1917, and by December 25th, 1917, according to the Evening Capital News, which is the Boise newspaper, Governor Moses Alexander announced, quote, that as a Christmas present, he will grant a reprieve to Matilda Hatfield, one of the 3 women now confined in the state penitentiary, end quote. And this actually would have been 4 people there, so that number is wrong. The reason the newspaper gives for this pardon is, quote, Mrs. Hatfield is the only one having children, and it was on behalf of the latter that the governor decided to release their mother, end quote. And also, again, this says children. She only has 1 child, but it is true that she does have a daughter, a very young daughter to care for. However, it was also revealed by the Evening Capital News on January 3rd, 1918, that one of the men involved in the theft, probably Temple Smith, but the newspaper is not clear, was still out on a $500 bond and had never actually been tried in court. The article also reveals that their arrest, quote, was the first the women claimed they knew the machine they were riding in had been stolen, end quote. And as a side note, I love that they call a car a machine.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but the idea of calling, like, they had no idea the machine they were in was stolen. I think we should start referring to cars as machines more often.
Yeah.
The women also said that they were under the impression that if they pleaded guilty, they'd receive a lighter sentence, but instead they got sent to the penitentiary. And this is actually an excuse that happens quite often, especially for women, especially if they come in with men, is somewhere they get the idea that if I plead guilty, they'll take it easier on me, and that never seems to be the case. Yeah. But perhaps because of this revelation that someone had been out on bond for several months, that all 3 women end up getting granted pardons and are scheduled to be released on January 15th, 1918. So it's originally just supposed to be Matilda, but then they all sort of file this claim, and either that's a mistake on sort of the judges or court's part, and they have to let them go, or if it is kind of one of those, well, you're not in for really that much, and if it truly is the first time you didn't know that it was stolen, then okay, we'll just let you go, kind of thing. But they are released on January 15th, 1918. They spend just 4 months and 6 days in the Idaho State Penitentiary. And so now we will go quickly to their post-prison lives, which, again, is not overly long, but has some interesting facts. So I'm not sure where Matilda goes after her release. She probably goes back to Montana. Her husband, Rocky, had died in December 1918, about 11 months after her release. They had been separated by this point for 3 years, so I don't know if she necessarily would have gone back to him, but after his death, it does free her up to marry again, and this is what she does on January 26, 1920, in Weber, Utah, to a man named Ray Alfred Holbrook. Ray Holbrook was a general laborer born in Albion, Idaho, and raised in the eastern part of the state, especially near Salmon and then Pocatello, about 200 miles south of that. He had been married once and had a son born in 1915, but he must have divorced his wife. I couldn't find records to confirm this, but both of them were married to different people by 1930, so I don't think his ex-wife had died. By 1930, Matilda and Ray were living in Anaconda, Montana, with Matilda's daughter, Vivian. Incidentally, Anaconda is in Deer Lodge County, which is also where a fellow territorial penitentiary is, and you can visit it like you can visit ours, and please do it. It's so cool. By the 1930s, Ray appears to have specialized as a boiler helper, which, can you guys guess what that is?
Do
They help the boiler?
Boilers?
Exactly. You guys are so smart. It is someone who works with boilers in various industries like the railroad. In the 1930 census, he's working in a foundry, which is a place that works with shaping and molding metal, which is definitely somewhere you need a boiler helper. She and Ray will remain in Anaconda for the rest of her life. In the 1940 census, one of her younger brothers, Thomas, is living with them, but otherwise she lives a very normal, law-abiding life. I never find any records of her outside of censuses. And unfortunately, she passed away in Anaconda, Montana on April 29th, 1943, of a cerebral hemorrhage from a larger underlying condition called arteriosclerosis, and that's when plaque builds up inside of your arteries. She was just 57 years old at the time of her death, and she is buried in the Lower Hill Cemetery in Anaconda. Next comes Ellen, her post-prison life. So Ellen returned to Wyoming to live with her parents and her 4 younger siblings who were still at home in Rock Springs. According to the 1920 census, she was divorced, probably from whoever she had been married to when she entered the penitentiary. And then about a month after the 1920 census was taken, Ellen married a man named William N. Metwire, Metwier. I don't have any more information about Metwire or the marriage, but it must have ended in divorce or death, because in December 1922, she marries a guy named William A. Hill. She may have been married a little bit longer to Hill than she had been to Metwire, but this one also ends in either divorce or death. Not clear which. On Christmas Eve, 1929, she marries a man named John W. Guy in Kemmerer, Wyoming. According to the 1930 census, the couple lived in Rock Springs, which I think is still where her family was at that time. John Guy was a carpenter for the Superior Lumber Company, but sadly he passed away in April 1933 of stomach cancer at just 47 years old. So, though I don't know what happened to her other 2 husbands, if either one of them ended in death and then her next marriage ended in death, I'm sure that would be really tough on her. But she finally found a man she could live the rest of her life with, and a man named John H., who would also sometimes go by the nicknames Hap or Jack. His last name is Farrington, so Hap or Jack Farrington. She marries him in August 1933 in Manila, Utah. So Hap Farrington was 15 years older than Ellen and worked as a well driller, actually much like Matilda's first husband had been, so they're still all very much related to this mining industry. They continue to live in Rock Springs, Wyoming, where they remained for the rest of their lives together, and they were married until her death, which came on April 30th, 1961 in Rock Springs from cardiorespiratory failure from underlying emphysema, chronic bronchitis, and asthma, and she is buried in the Rock Springs Cemetery. And lastly, Martha. She also returns to Wyoming after her release from prison. She lives in the same county as her cousin Ellen in a town called Superior, about 20 miles northeast of Rock Springs. The 1920 census finds her living and working in a boarding house in Superior, having gotten divorced from Martha Chrisman. Then in October 1920, in Paris, Idaho, Martha marries a man named Bert Bridges. Bert was born in Utah to a farming family, and in Wyoming he worked as a general laborer, and these 2 remained married for the rest of their lives. The 1940 census lists her class of worker, which is like a question they ask, is like, what class of worker are you? And she lists herself as a government worker and stated that she was part of a sewing room project where she worked sewing. I don't know exactly what she did. 1940, we're out of the Depression. We're starting to get involved in World War II, but of course that's mostly overseas by this point still. So it could be a relief organization or support organization. I know sometimes in those early years of when it's more just the war in Europe, sometimes women would make socks or, put their sewing skills to use, and then send stuff overseas. So I don't know if it's something like that. Obviously not. So that kind of thing isn't listed. Then the couple remained together in Rock Springs until Bert passed away in November 1953 at the age of 73. His death record lists his occupation as retired highway employee, so maybe they both worked for the federal or state government or something like that. So Martha died 11 years later on May 5th, 1964, never having remarried. Now, curiously, Her cause of death is something that might sound very familiar. She dies of cardiorespiratory failure from emphysema and chronic bronchitis, which is literally the same thing her cousin Ellen died of. So weird. But also like her cousin, Martha is buried in the Rock Springs Cemetery along with her husband and many other relatives. And so that is the fairly short, I guess pretty long story of our three ladies who all came in but don't seem to be connected in ways other than the last two are cousins, Matilda Hatfield, Ellen Pappas, and Martha Chrisman.
Interesting.
Yeah. Nothing like 4 months in a penitentiary to keep your nose clean the rest of your life. It sounds like they didn't get into any more trouble. And to be there like at the tail end of World War I and like the start of the influenza pandemic and all this stuff, that's wow, what a time. Yikes.
They may have not been in a full-fledged gang. Maybe they were at a one and done gang.
Yeah.
They tried their hand at it. Didn't turn out so well.
Yeah. They were like, guys, we're going to start a gang, and then they get caught immediately. So I don't know if that counts as a gang. But they, again, I didn't dig more into the men. I probably should have, but I think they were only kept in for a couple of years and then were let out as well. So I think probably in the scale of things, this is a pretty minor crime, especially where the women were involved. So it kind of helped pull that story out a little bit to talk about all three of them, because by themselves they weren't a particularly long story. But yeah, some of those weird coincidences or connections, like, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense sometimes, but that's the fun of this podcast.
I enjoyed having you do 3 at a time, Skye. That was interesting to have 3 stories brought up side by side.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and for everybody who's watched our episode 100 and gone through the site, watching our tour and listening to our tour. It still cracks me up to hear our voices. And, we are just very humble, like historians digging into files. So when people are like, hey, are you the Anthony? Are you the Sam? I get embarrassed, and I'm like, oh, yeah.
It's so wild, right? Where you're so just funny. Like, no, I'm not. Like, I am that person, but I'm not this, like, famous. I'm not famous. I'm just a girl.
Yeah.
I feel so honored to be part of this and part of, bringing these stories to people's lives, and that they still find it so interesting. So, yes, as a humble historian 2,000 miles away, thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. It's a true joy to be able to do this.
Yeah. Hop on a flight, go visit Skye,
and
see
then
the
go to the
city.
Penitentiary. Yeah, just make it like a big cross country. You start from wherever you are, visit the closest first, then go the furthest away. You get the full Anthony Sam Skye experience. All right, my friends, should we close it out?
Let's close it out. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Do your own time.
Do your own number.
Goodbye, everybody.
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Not only do we get to hear your feedback about the show, but it helps others find us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in today's episode, follow our Facebook group at Behind Gray Walls Podcast. And we have a podcast Instagram as well. You can find us on Instagram at Behind Gray Walls Pod.